One of Russia's most high-profile Kremlin critics has been sentenced to 25 years in prison in Moscow. Vladimir Kara-Murza was found guilty on alleged charges of treason for criticizing the war in Ukraine in what was widely viewed as a show trial. The opposition activist has spent years speaking out against the Russian president and even survived 2 poisonings. The unprecedented sentence is the lengthiest ever given to an opponent of President Putin, highlighting the crackdown on dissenters since Russia's invasion. Evgenia Kara-Murza is the wife of Vladimir Kara-Murza, and she joins me now. Evgenia, I want to thank you for joining us on what must be a difficult day. I wonder if we can start. What is your reaction to the prison sentence handed down to your husband?
Hello, thank you very much for inviting me here today. Well, unfortunately, I was not surprised by the sentence that my husband was given for his long time work, brave and consistent work on behalf of Russian civil society. His work raising awareness about the situation with human rights in Russia and denouncing the crimes committed by the current government against our neighbors and against the Russian population. I was not surprised because when prosecutor Loktionov asked for this sentence in Vladimir's case, he said, and I quote, "This is our enemy who must be punished." I understand that the current Russian government sees my husband as its personal enemy for all his work, and specifically for campaigning for the introduction of Magnitsky sanctions, targeted sanctions against human rights violators. For that specific campaigning, Vladimir was already attacked twice in the past. He survived 2 poisoning attacks in 2015 and 2017. So, of course, I'm not also surprised by the fact that my husband continues being under attack by the current Russian government because his voice is loud and clear, and they're very much afraid of such voices.
I read that in his reaction to the sentence, what he told his lawyer, he was almost proud with the 25 years, saying that it proved he said his self-worth had even gone up. It proved he'd done everything right to be considered such a threat by the Russian state. I wonder, do you know how he is right now? Do you have a sense of his condition?
My husband is a very strong man. For someone to survive 2 poisonings and still refuse to leave his country and still refuse to give up his fight, this is serious. I mean, this is someone who truly understands what he's fighting for. This is a true patriot. His health, however, is not that strong, unfortunately. These 2 poisoning attacks against him resulted in peripheral nerve damage, He developed polyneuropathy symptoms in his left foot and left hand as a result of those poisonings. And for years, he'd been able to keep those symptoms at bay through regular physical exercise and through intensive physical rehabilitation after the poisonings. But after this year in pretrial detention and some time that he spent in solitary confinement, these symptoms not only returned, but seem to be spreading to his right side now. He's losing feeling in both his feet, and he's got no feeling in his left hand. He's also lost over 40 pounds, closer to 50 now, actually. So I understand that this is a diagnosis, in fact, this is an official diagnosis that was given to him by the head neurologist of the Moscow prison system. And then, thanks to the efforts of Vladimir's lawyers, it was also confirmed at a civilian hospital where some tests were run as well. This diagnosis is on the list of medical conditions that prevent, under the Russian law, prevent people from being incarcerated. And yet it does not seem to bother the Russian authorities. They made it clear to my husband's lawyers that diagnosis or no diagnosis, Vladimir would be sentenced and will be serving his sentence in strict regime. So I understand that his condition will only worsen with time. So I understand that he doesn't have much time. He doesn't have those, he doesn't have 5 years, let alone 25. And this because this condition can lead to paralysis. And I understand that behind bars he will not get any proper medical treatment. So I'm very worried for his health and his life, of course.
Your husband also holds British citizenship, but you said that the United Kingdom's response to this has been weak. What makes you say that? What would you like to see from the UK?
Well, first of all, I want to say how grateful I am to Canada for being the first country to introduce sanctions, targeted Magnitsky sanctions against several perpetrators in my husband's case. The United States has also introduced such sanctions last March. And so far, the UK has not done so. And it is quite baffling, in my opinion, because Vladimir is indeed a British citizen. And I believe that it is the responsibility of the British government to stand up for him and to defend him and to act on his behalf. So I am quite baffled. I am very grateful for the presence of representatives of the UK embassy in Moscow at my husband's trial. I am grateful for the strong statement made by the US ambassador, but I believe that now that it is becoming a question of life and death in Vladimir's case, and I believe that it is not time anymore for expressing concern and for statements. I believe I would like for the UK government to be more proactive in my husband's case.
You mentioned Canada and Magnitsky sanctions aimed at the people involved in your case. Canada has issued a statement on your husband and says it stands with the democratic forces of Russia and has deplored this particular sentence. What more would you like to see from Canada and other countries at this point?
I believe that everything at this point has to be done to weaken the regime in the Kremlin. This is the only way the only way for Russia to stop being a threat to itself and its neighbors is for it to become a democracy. And in order for that to happen, the vertical of power built by Vladimir Putin in our country has to collapse. This and only this will give us a chance to build a democracy in our country. For as long as there is an authoritarian or totalitarian regime in our country, Russia will continue being a threat to itself and its neighbors and to the entire world. So I believe that Canada can continue helping Ukraine in all that Ukraine needs to win this war on Ukraine's terms. Canada can continue imposing sanctions, both economic sanctions that will weaken the Russian economy and make it costlier for the regime to continue warmongering, and targeted Magnitsky sanctions against specific human rights violators responsible for committing those absolutely atrocious crimes. And this way, you would send a very clear message to the regime that you see who real criminals are, and that those criminals will not be allowed to get away with committing those crimes. And it will also send a very strong message of solidarity and support to all those Russians, both inside and outside of the country, who continue opposing the regime. And Russia today counts over 500 political prisoners. And I believe that they need to hear the message of solidarity and support of the democratic world, because they very much want to see a different Russia as well. And they've been risking their freedom and very often their lives to show that they want a different future for our country. Detentions in Russia continue on a daily basis. Over 20,000 people have been arbitrarily detained in the country over the last year. And I believe that it is extremely important to show solidarity with these people, because they're going to be the ones that will make sure that Russia is a democracy after the collapse of this regime.
Evgenia Kara-Murza, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for making the time to speak with me.